Well, greetings, my beloved clients and friends. So, today is October 7th, I believe, and it's Friday. The um, unemployment numbers just came out, and they were, it shows a very healthy economy still, okay, which on the surface would sound good. But the Fed is trying to slow down the economy, and the economy is not wanting to slow down. Okay, he's trying to control inflation, and so the market was hoping for a less favorable uh, unemployment reading, right? Because they're wanting to see that, hey, the economy is taking a turn for the worse. The Fed doesn't have to tighten so much. Maybe we're coming to the end of this tightening cycle. That's the hope, okay? The fear is that we're not coming to the end of the tightening cycle, that the economy is still going gangbusters, and that the Fed's gonna have to continue to tighten aggressively. That's the fear, okay? So those are the two sides of the argument. Well, so I want to take a step back, and maybe this video might be a little bit different, but kind of talk about economics and how maybe the things that we've been taught as economics or economists and believed for many generations may not necessarily apply. And so here's a couple things that that's my background, is economics. That's what I studied in college back in the 80s and 90s, and what I've been applying myself to ever since. And so here's what we were taught as far as the Federal Reserve. There was a saying that you could pull on a string, but you can't push on it. And what that meant was, if the economy was overheated and growing too quickly, it was very, the Fed was very effective at slowing it down by raising rates. That was never a problem. You could raise rates, you slow down the economy. That's pulling on a string, right? But the belief was that Federal Reserve operations were not as effective at stimulating a struggling economy. So they were not as effective at pushing on a string, right? If the economy was stuck and they didn't want to get out, there wasn't much the Fed could do. And that belief came about because they analyzed the Great Depression. Okay, so there was the Roaring '20s, which was a white hot economy, right? And then finally it just got crazy, and October of '29, stock market crashed, and there was this Great Depression, right? For really all the way up until World War II is what finally got us out of that, right? And so, and they could not stimulate the economy. They could not get it back going. So they made a lot of mistakes. And in 1932, they elected FDR, Roosevelt, and he said, we're gonna stimulate this economy. He came out with his New Deal, and he just gave people jobs and created this, they call it alphabet soup, all these government programs to help people, get them jobs, even if that job was to plant potatoes, and then when they came out to bury them, you know, even if that job was to move dirt from here to there and then from there to here, right? They just wanted to get the economy going, and it was just a massive government spend trying to get this economy going. And quite frankly, he couldn't do it. I mean, he tried and he was doing all he could, but really it wasn't until World War II that got the economy really going again, and that's the massive spend of a world war that, you know, they sent all the young men to work. And so they basically gave them jobs as soldiers, and they put the women to work who hadn't been working. They said, so there was a massive increase in the labor force. Now the men are getting checks, their military pay, and the women are getting checks as they're working in the factories making, you know, bombs and uniforms and airplanes and tanks and cigarettes and anything to support the war effort, right? And so that finally got the economy going. It's massive stimulus. So economists learned from that you could pull on a string, but you can't push. Or if you push, you have to push massively, right? Like World War II level push. Not even New Deal level push wasn't enough, okay? So my first economics professor, Dr. Watry, his license plate read MV equals PQ. And that's the macroeconomic equation, mass times velocity equals price times quantity. And the V in that equation is velocity, which means the speed of the economy. And so let me give you an example. Let's say the government wants to stimulate the economy, so they send me a check for $100. And what do I do with that $100 check? I go out and I buy myself a pair of shoes, right? And the hope is that, so that cobbler gets the $100 and he goes out and he takes his family to dinner. And the restaurateur takes those $100 and he goes and buys himself a hat. And that hatter gets the $100 and he goes and takes his family out to a show. And that showman gets the $100 and he goes and he takes his car into the mechanic. And that mechanic gets the $100 and he goes to the casino. And the casino operator gets the $100 and on it goes. That's a healthy economy with a lot of velocity, that $100 turns over many times, okay? And so that's an effective way, in theory, that the government could stimulate the economy. It benefited not just the first guy that got the $100 check, but everybody else that continued to spend that money because it had good velocity. Here's where it doesn't work. Let's say I got that $100 check. I went and bought myself a pair of shoes. And then the cobbler, because he was afraid and he was fearful of the economy and things like that, there was uncertainty about the future, and he said, I might not get another 100 next month, so I better just put this away so I can at least pay the rent next month. And so he doesn't spend the money. He doesn't go to the show. He doesn't take his family to dinner or anything. He just sits on that money. He puts it in the bank, or worse yet, he puts it under his mattress, right? That's so in that instance, the government trying to stimulate the economy was not very effective, right? So because they were trying to push on a string that didn't want to move. And that was what happened in the Great Depression. And if you think about why, you know, it started in October 29, and their initial reaction wasn't one of stimulus. And I think it was Hoover that he didn't do a very good job. And so in 1932, which was 3 years later, they elected Roosevelt. So imagine for 3 years, you're feeling the pain of the Great Depression and being out of work and seeing people jump out of windows and see things really bad for 3 years. And then you finally start getting some checks coming in. Well, you're not so sure that this stimulus is going to work because you've had 3 years of a rough time, you know? And so you're pretty cautious at those first checks coming in, and this first job, you're like, man, I've lost 6 jobs in the last 5 years. Who knows if this one is going to last? And, you know, so there's this caution, right? And so all the stimulus to a people that were scared and shell-shocked didn't have the desired effect, and they weren't able to push on that string. Compare that to the COVID crisis of 2020, right? Like, I don't know, 20 people got COVID in the United States and they shut down the economy, right? And unemployment spiked to 14%. And guess what happened the very next day almost? Everybody got checks in the mail, right? People that we weren't even out of work, people that were not even feeling the pain yet, got checks. And they kept getting checks. And PPP loans. And so people didn't experience years of pain. And what they experienced was that if there's a moment of pain, the government's gonna step in, right? And really, that's what we've been experiencing for the last 12 years, since the global financial crisis of 2009, when the truth is that the global financial system was literally within hours of seizing up. It really was. And the leaders of government and finance got together, and the Fed backstopped the economy. They said, we're going to backstop the economy, and we're going to take rates to zero. We're going to buy up every bond that's out there, and we're going to not let this thing fail. And they call it, too big to fail, and this and that. And they kept rates at zero, and they kept the quantitative easing and all these things going, and they really never let up on the gas. It still hadn't, when COVID hit, they were still at zero rates, and so this was a generation that had not experienced fear, really, not like the Great Depression generation, right? They had experienced that the government would bail them out, and if anything bad happened, and there was a Fed put. That's what they called it on Wall Street. There's like, man, there was a V-shaped recovery in 2020 when the market dropped, and the Fed really bailed out the market. And so there's like, don't bet against the Fed, because they're not going to let the market drop, or they're not going to let the economy slow down, or they'll send you a check if they have to. And Ben Bernanke, known as Helicopter Ben, because he said, I'm going to keep this economy going, even if I have to load up helicopters with cash and fly them over every city in America and just dump out cash. I'm not going to let this economy fail. That was what this generation grew up on. So now that the Fed is tightening, and one other thing, so we were at close to zero interest rates even before COVID, and many economists and investors, including Buffett, were like, we don't really know the long-term effects of zero interest rates. It's too early to tell. We don't really know. Because that was unprecedented. We hadn't seen zero interest rates, especially for an extended period of time. So we didn't really know what would be the effect of that long-term. And we still don't know. It's still a question mark. And so this discussion is really more of a question, more of thinking out loud than an answer. And so I was saying that, this generation is not one that had to live in 3 years of fear that things could get really bad. And so now Fed Chair Powell has raised rates 5 times. The last 3 times were 0.75%. And the people are not stopping spending. The velocity is not going down. And this economy is resilient. And I believe is it possible, there's a question, that they're not afraid of bad times because they've always been bailed out before. And they're not going to stop spending. Yeah, maybe housing. If you have to borrow money, you used to be able to borrow at 2.5 or 3, and now it's close to 7, which is a big part of the economy. And maybe I'm not going to buy a car because for so many years I could get zero interest from the dealership, and now they're going to try to charge me 4 or 5 or something. And So maybe that's going to slow down a little, those big ticket credit items, but people are still spending, right? The stores are still full, and the restaurants and the hotels and the airports, and we're not slowing down. The unemployment numbers was incredibly strong. I mean, hiring is still going on, and there's still a labor shortage. There's a housing shortage, right? There's a shortage of stuff that there are more people want to buy stuff than that there is stuff to buy. And so my question is, has the paradigm shifted from the belief that the economy is like a string that the Fed could pull on but not push, to, is it possible that maybe we should have a new paradigm, like maybe the economy is more like a wheelbarrow that can be pushed, like a wheelbarrow full of wet cement, right? That can be pushed but not pulled. Maybe, when the Fed decides to pour money out the helicopter, they could get the economy going, even in the midst of a pandemic. But maybe they can't pull it as effectively as they thought they could. And maybe that's what, Powell is facing criticism that, yeah, man, when he saw inflation in the summer of 21, he should have acted right away. And he waited 9 months, really. He started talking about it in November, but he didn't do anything until March. And maybe it's because he was going back on what he'd been taught as an economist, that anytime I want to, I could really just pull on that string and slow it down. But I don't want to push on it too. But I don't want it to stall because I'm afraid that I won't be able to get it back going. Maybe that was his mentality, right? And that's what every economist has been taught. Don't worry, you could always pull on the string. You can always slow down the economy, but you don't want a stalled out economy because you might not be able to get it out. That was John Maynard Keynes. It could be like an elevator that just gets stuck. So, economists, we're just like the blind man and the elephant. One guy called it a drum and the other guy called it a tree. They walked up to the elephant. They didn't know. We don't know. So that's something we're thinking about. Is it possible that this generation is different than the generation that endured the Great Depression, that they're the opposite, that they have no fear about a bad economy because they've never been through one. And so it's going to be really hard to slow them down, and you're going to have to really bring the pain. If that's the case, we might see rates go up a lot, which was really something we hadn't really considered. It didn't seem like it would be necessary. We looked at, because the long-term rates are not really going up. I think my thought was that, investors globally have not seen 4% risk-free money for such a long time. Since 2008 or 7, that they would welcome it and money would come in and keep rates low. But maybe the Fed really has a tougher job ahead of slowing down this hot economy than we had considered. So we're thinking about that and trying to decide how to allocate the portfolio. I think because the uncertainty, we're probably going to err on the side of being more conservative than not. So, that's just the type of things we're thinking about in the office, and that, we're really scratching our heads and reading and thinking and to try to grow and protect your wealth over time. So just something to consider. Hope you guys have a great weekend.